I awoke to a sinking feeling. It wasn't a symptom of the nerves or any kind of sickness, but a literal sinking feeling at my core, my center of gravity. I lay there, flat against the sterile cot, without the assistance of the restraints still binding me at the waist and ankles. I opened my eyes to the harsh brightness of functioning lights, and I listened for the grinding clicks and clanks of mechanical failure, only to hear the serene hum of the environmental stabilizer. Sometime in my unconscious state, in the gap between delusion and lucidity, that hopeless nightmare had dissolved into normality once more. Did I dream? Had I dreamt within a dream? Or was there a dream at all? When I came around and examined myself, the concept of pain became surreal, as I had evidently suffered a slashed foot and a compound fracture without so much as a scratch to speak for them. Or had I? I had no way of knowing for sure. Somehow, I had wandered my way to the infirmary, strapped myself down, and the empty anesthetic syringe still sat to the right of my unbroken ankle. Had I wandered in my sleep? Had I imagined the whole thing? Still, the illness clung to my bones like ice. My fever had evidently broken, or may have never occurred in the first place. Yet I could still hardly see straight, and felt like I hadn't eaten a solid meal in weeks. In spite of all this, all of the confusion and disembodiment, the calendar readout on the far wall attested to a veil of lies. All of the agony and unrest, the days upon days of hunger, illness, and hallucinations, all of it had occurred in less than 12 hours from the time I heard my son's voice over the comlink. Time had, once again, eluded my grasp. That sight may have been the first time the question crossed my mind. With no one else around, no other perspective to contrast my own, was there any real line dividing hallucination from reality? If my experience was my own, and only my own, did it really matter? That was the question that fueled my tenacity for survival during my days of recovery. Each moment of each day, that same question weighed on my mind. Each moment spent considering that question became another moment of control, another moment of strength, and the question itself became more significant than any conclusion I could have drawn. Though, that isn't to say I never sought an answer. Eventually, the answer did come to me. My paranoia and delirium had entirely dissipated, and I had arrived at a threshold. That threshold lay in the realization that, if my reality was my own, then so too was my contentment with that reality. It was not freedom from delusion that concerned me nearly as much as balance, and my ability to live with myself. With time and meditation, the experience faded into an unpleasant dream, and my health slowly returned. Fortunately, my training back home proved elemental to my recovery. When you're pushing through the stress and endurance tests, spending hours upon hours in zero gravity, it's more about acclimation than building strength. Your body learns to accept weightlessness and to fight through the sickness. Your sense of direction learns to cope without the concepts of north or south, up or down. More to the point, your body learns to heal in an artificial environment in the false gravity of a centrifuge. Those first few bites of warm food hit a suffering stomach in silent contentment. Those first few tired steps on the treadmill moved me forward with sound mind and clear direction. Those first few minutes of restful sleep brought only comforting darkness, uninterrupted by dreams or nightmares. The days flowed calmly and without obsession, and I slowly settled back into sanity. The physician could tell that it wasn't my first journey into deep space. She said that sickness was no indicator of experience. It happened to everyone. She was of the opinion that recovery time spoke more clearly for someone's proverbial sea legs. She hardly had to attend to me at all, and her visits were short and sweet. Truth be told, for the most part, I nursed myself back to health without her assistance. As always, James was the first to greet me in my first few waking moments. After I was released, I hadn't so much as made my way to the lockers before the kid came jogging up to my side, like a neglected puppy, tail wagging and eyes agleam. Nothing could have told me just how close we were to landing, quite like his spark of enthusiasm. "Glad to see you on your feet, sir," he exclaimed with a clap on my shoulder. "Lots of us were starting to worry that we'd have to leave you behind." "Don't count me out just yet, kid," I told him. "I left my whole life back on Earth just like everyone here. I wouldn't miss this party for the world." Apparently, I had recovered just in time, as the recon drones had just finished making their rounds, and we were about to begin preparations for the first expedition. Captain Beck had made do with the interim helmsman. He'd only needed to keep the ship in a high orbit long enough to receive accurate feedback from the recon session, a job he could surely handle with minimal supervision. Nevertheless, the crew were elated when I relieved him of his station. Just one less worry. In the coming days, they'd be needing a more experienced hand to guide the descent into low orbit, and, not long after, landing. The crew were awaiting their orders before I even took the helm, and the captain was more than ready to convey them. At last, we'd reached the end of the transit, and our kind would take the first steps on the surface of what would hopefully become our new home. The console came alive at my fingertips as I took my seat. I made minor thrust adjustments at the mid and aft fuselage sectors, then realigned our trajectory until the orbital altimeter showed decay at nil. I set main engines to neutral and began deacceleration phases to minimal orbital velocity. The navigation analysis crew sat at the ready. "Flight path stabilized and holding," I announced. "Your orders, sir?" The captain stood at my side, gazing at the master bridge display, at the planet's soft glow. He maintained a cool exterior well. It came with the territory. Still, we all knew he was just as excited as the rest of us. He spoke flatly. "Give me the rundown on the recon analysis." One of the analysis crews spoke up without hesitation. "Sir, primary inspection detected an average gravitational acceleration of 9.25. No anomalies. A slight relief from Earth's gravitational pull, which should be helpful in the construction. Terrestrial analysis shows a stable, mostly metamorphic and sedimentary infrastructure, and shouldn't give us too much trouble in the terraforming process. Atmospheric samples show a gas composition similar to that of Earth, though with a noticeable lack of neon, argon, and iodine. Oxygen content is 28%, carbon dioxide less than 3%. Great conditions for human life, although the drones don't account for any presence of native viruses or microbial contagions. It would be best to rely on pressure suits until further notice after touchdown." The captain nodded. "Well, no time like the present, gentlemen." He spoke while turning to me. "Maintain orbit and run geographical survey protocols. Let's find a place to set up camp, and make it someplace green." "Topographic reading in process," I announced after a brief pause. A mesh global display expanded across my holomonitor. I panned over the surface and compared terrain mapping to the recon analysis readout. "I've found a sizable clearing on one of the northern hemisphere's major continents, environmentally comparable to Earth's subtropics. Little difficult terrain, should give no complications in the initial sweep and setup." Taking a seat in his chair behind the helm, he spoke with conviction. "Then that's our destination. Let's get planetside and find what we came for." I affirmed his order and passed it down the chain. "Yes, sir. Alert all essential crew. Navigation operatives report to primary coordination deck." All defense and construction personnel to peripheral lander hangar and await further orders. Planetfall sequence protocols to initiate in T-minus 30 minutes. Docking crew, status check. Every member of the docking crew reported all systems green, and the descent procedure was a go. As I watched the final sequences enter automation, the illusion dissolved and hurled me back into that horrific nightmare. I looked up from my holo monitor to find the bridge dark and abandoned. The last flickering consoles around me blinked out one by one, leaving me in total darkness, surrounded by the empty and lifeless ship I had come to know so well. The only light left was that of the softly glowing planet in the distance, and I gazed upon it for the remainder of that restless night. The planetfall sequence, once initiated, could not be stopped. The mission control sector and peripheral's resource barge would separate from the primary centrifuge, descend to atmospheric entry, and set trajectory to the specified coordinates. Trouble, though, was that a smooth entry would not be possible without a coordination crew. They would be needed to make the subtle adjustments for the entry turbulence and barometric pressure changes. The central computer could not process these calculations without further data that I did not have at my disposal, since the probes were never actually dispatched. Without its automated guidance, entry would be left up to pure instinct. For a single man, it would be like trying to look left and right at the same time. It could not be done. In short, that drifting fortress would not be my home for much longer. Within 24 hours, final descent into the planet's gravitational field would begin. Within 48 hours, atmospheric contact and all evacuation ports would engage lockdown. I'd be left with no option but to wait for my death in a ship reduced to shrapnel and dust. There was no way around it. If I wanted to survive, I'd have to take an escape shuttle to the surface, with no intel, limited resources, and no support. It was a massive gamble, but it was the only chance I had. I didn't have time to think, not with that short of time crunch, but it was difficult to do anything other than sit in confounded disbelief in the wake of such a distressing conundrum, and it brought about a measure of enlightenment. Even if what I had experienced up to that point had been an illusion, there were forces at work around me beyond my control. Things were happening by no action of my own, things that could not have happened without a guiding hand. I could not have diminished to such sickness and near starvation in a matter of hours. I have no history of sleepwalking, and I did not unconsciously strap myself to that cot. The compound fracture and the quickly festering slash at the bottom of my foot were real. I'll never forget the pain, and I couldn't have imagined it all. And most importantly, activating the planetfall sequence requires multiple personnel at multiple consoles. I could not have started the descent alone. On top of the obvious meddling of outside forces, it had seemed all too deliberate. It fed my despair, prolonged my mourning, gave me anger through fear, and gave me focus through defiance. And when I had finally found the resolve to climb to my feet and press forward, it rewarded me with one last vision of hope. There was a message. Through all of the chaos, the nightmares of hopelessness and death, it was provoking me, directing me. It wanted something from me, and it had been manipulating me to that end. These were the thoughts that raced through my head on that restless night. No doubt, it would show me more in my last hours aboard that ship to cement my determination. It would not allow me to relapse into doubt, and it would do whatever necessary to reel me in. "Find me," the little girl had said. That's what it wanted. So I would oblige. I couldn't have gotten more than an hour of sleep, if I slept at all, and the hallucinations became relentless from the moment I awoke. For brief moments in the dimness, the spacious corridors turned bright and cramped with visions of the crew rushing to their stations. At random intervals, the electric hums and silence drowned in blaring sirens, clamoring boots, and the mechanical whirring of engines and disengaging couplings beneath my feet. I ignored these things. I would be taking the leap of faith at my own discretion and at my own pace, and I refused to be manipulated by the madness stirring around me. If abandoning the ship would kill me, then it would be the consequences of my decision, and mine alone. I calmly made my preparations over the course of the following 12 hours. I ran a system diagnostic of IDS-00251, the escape shuttle that would carry me to the surface, while the phantom of my son stood at my side, and questioned every step with wide-eyed wonder. I ignored him. I ran an inventory check of the remaining food and water supply, then gathered as much as the shuttle could hold. The image of my kitchen back home on Earth haunted me as I rushed about the cold storage pantries. My wife prepared our evening meal and told me stories of our growing son, and I went about my business without a single word in response. Finally, I made my way to the personnel outfitting lockers for a routine check of my flight gear and pressure suit. There, I had one last, illusory encounter, and the only conversation I would entertain within that waking dream. James stood before his locker 7 spaces down from mine, already half-dressed for departure. He was checking the life support system for malfunctions when he noticed me, and he smiled that same eager smile that I remembered so well. "Think you'll find a new home down there, sir?" he asked me. Apparently, it realized I could see through the ruse and was finished insisting on its own illusion. It finally decided to address me directly, though still through James' visage for some reason I could not understand. "That's what I'm hoping for," I replied. I began to suit up at an intentionally slow pace. I still had 6 hours before lockdown, and I wanted to hear what it had to say. Maybe, I thought, it would explain itself, or at least give me some idea as to what it wanted from me. I would not be so fortunate, and it would not be so generous. But I would learn that I was making the right decision, and I would dwell upon what it would say to me for some time to come. It would guide my every step forward from then on. For the final 3 hours before launch, my last few aboard the Odyssey, I sat in the cockpit of my escape shuttle. All preparations were complete, and I had already entered the launch sequence code. I sat there, staring at the brightly glowing console before me, its light refracting and distorting slightly through my visor. My helmet's HUD mimicked its query. "Security sequence acknowledged. IDS-00251. Deployment protocol initiated. Preliminary guidance systems diagnostic clear. Confirm command." I was one keystroke away from leaving the ship behind for good. One keystroke away from approaching whatever destiny awaited me, and so I sat there, hesitating until the last possible second, contemplating my final exchange with James. "Maybe you'll be a hero one day, sir," he mused. "Or maybe just a memory like us." I sat on the bench and latched up my boots, never looking up to make eye contact. Maybe both, maybe neither. Who knows? And who would there be to remember anyway? "Maybe no one," he said in a voice less familiar with every syllable. "But we remember. We always remember." I stood to face him, pulling my modular harness over my shoulders and latching it to my belt. "And who are you exactly?" He did not answer. He stood before me as the frozen cadaver of my nightmares, and he spoke in that same icy breath that chilled my skin. "Things gone by, things to come, things afar and things near. and things forever and never. We remember them. The sight no longer frightened me. It was none of these things it appeared to be, and so I continued to dress as I questioned it further. You remember James? You remember the crew? Do you know what happened to our world? I slid on and latched my gloves, flexing my fingers to tighten the slack. We remember the ones lost to time. We remember disaster, and we remember sorrow, and we remember new beginnings from tragic ends. He spoke in a sigh of death. As I fastened the visor over my helmet's lower guard and uplink terminal, the HUD came into view, along with the image of my son as I saw him on his birthday. His voice filtered through the helmet's audio system. But Daddy, we remember you now. We watch closely and we listen. We remember through you and through those who came before you. And we remember all through the many, all ages of life and death. My suit began synchronization with my assigned escape shuttle's computer, and the pressurization vacuum tightened the vital support gel bladders against my limbs and torso. And as the suit sealed me away from my familiar environment for the last time, I asked it one last question. What do you want from me? In the form of a little girl with eyes of polished coal, it gave me one last response. Abandon your prison. Leave this place and find your answers. Find yourself. Find me. I sat back in the cockpit, staring into the middle distance and contemplating its words in a pensive daze, until the blaring alarm and imposing text of a status alert spanned across my visor. Now approaching Cygnus 9 gravitational well. Planetfall lockdown finalization imminent. Pending order auto-termination in 30 seconds. Confirm command? This was it. Do or die. Flushing all remaining doubt from my mind, holding my breath, I confirmed the launch order. The launch portal doors receded, the electromagnetic propulsion rail extended, the docking clamps detached, the rail coupling aligned, and I felt the ship hum and rattle beneath me as the engines roared to life and shot me to the stars. And so I was bound for that pale green orb in the distance, the ornament on the mantle of my discontent, to find her, to find it. I would brave the unknown without a crew, without a colony, alone, estranged from all things familiar and comfortable, reaching for hope.